This episode of Recording Studio Rockstars is brought to you by OWC, Spectra 1964, Atom Audio, Samply, Isotope, and API. You're hearing my voice right now on the API 3122V mic pre and Spectra 1964 C610 comp limiter through Isotope, RX, Ozone, and Neutron, all recorded safely onto an OWC SSD and mixed on Atom Audio monitors. So get ready to rock.
And so I'm keeping these mental notes and I'm writing the pre as she's performing. It just captured her tonality in such a strong way. And then once I sent her the rough of it, she sent me an email back and said, "This is the best I've ever heard my voice sound." And she's a very accomplished recording artist. So hearing that, I was like, okay, well, I guess these legends got something right and maybe I should take note and try that.
Welcome to Recording Studio Rockstars. I'm Lil Jon, and this is the podcast created to help you become a rock star of the recording studio. In my studio, I chose the OWC Mini-Stack STX Thunderbolt 4 certified storage and expansion hub because it seamlessly connects to my Mac Mini M1 for my dedicated audio drives, sample libraries, and backup drives. It's the perfect size to stack with the Mac Mini and add storage and connectivity over Thunderbolt or USB. Whether you have the new or older Mac Mini, nothing stacks up in your studio quite like OWC. Find the new Mini-Stack STX and all your storage needs at macsales.com/rockstars. Ever wonder how I get a consistent sound quality mixing hundreds of episodes of Recording Studio Rockstars? It's because I've been cheating by using Isotope, RX, Ozone, and Neutron on every single episode. Right now, you are hearing RX breath control, declick, declip, DS, deplosive, voice denoise, Ozone multiband compression, Neutron EQ, and limiting, all from Isotope. Try out the subscription option for yourself with an extended 30-day free trial at isotope.com/rockstars or use the code ROCK10 to get 10% off any individual plugin purchase. Howdy, Rockstars. It's your host, Lil Jon. Welcome back to Recording Studio Rockstars, bringing you into the studio to learn from recording professionals so that you can make your best record ever and be a rock star of the studio yourself. My guest today is Sean Giovanni, a producer, engineer, and owner of the record shop in Nashville, Tennessee. Gio has worked with artists such as John Legend, Big and Rich, Zakk Wylde, Tim McGraw, the Wallflowers, Juicy J, Lil Jon, to name just a few. After moving to Nashville at 20 years old and unable to land an internship at a studio, Gio set out to build his own path in the recording industry with a focus on supporting artists in achieving their creative vision and offering a wide range of content creation services in addition to production. A frequent NAMM show panelist, speaker at Belmont, MTSU, SAE, the Recording Academy, Gio has also appeared in interviews with the likes of Atom Audio, Antelope Audio, Make It in Music, the Working Your Way Out podcast, Recording Connection, and many more to discuss topics such as entrepreneurship, time management, building a brand, leading with purpose, overcoming adversity, and other helpful topics. I want to give it a shout out and a thank you to Paul at DPA Microphones for originally introducing us. In fact, Paul and Gio stopped by the Toy Box studio at that time for a brief hello and visit. And I'm glad to get a chance to finally connect with you, Gio, and really have a chance to have a conversation. So please welcome Sean Giovanni to Recording Studio Rockstars. Gio, are you ready to rock, my friend?
I was born ready, brother.
Right on, dude. Well, it's cool to meet you, and it's cool to go, kind of check out your world at the record shop, Nashville, and see what you do there. And it's very, very clear to me right from the get-go that you move with a real sense of intention. And you've really got sort of a confidence behind what you're trying to do and what you're trying to do in recording and to help artists and to help people who are making their music. So welcome to the show. Give us a little bit more of an introduction in your own words into how you kind of got started in music and found your way at this point here in Nashville.
Well, thanks for having me on the show, man. I'm really excited to chat with you. When I meet new folks and they ask me what I do, I've come to start to describe myself as a sonic storyteller. I think that that's the best description of what I have the privilege to do on a day-to-day basis. And that comes out of my passion for focusing on production in a way of taking an artist's idea, bringing it to life, and then thinking about how sounds, arrangement, approaches that we can take will help to shape the sonic nature of a track in a way that will tell a story in a similar way that the lyric would. And my path was a little crazy, I guess, in moving to Nashville. As you mentioned in the intro, I moved here out of recording school that I went to in Minneapolis with wide eyes and big dreams of finding my way to make impact in the recording industry in a town like Nashville. And I was very quickly drop kicked in the face and had figured out that it's a challenging market to get into, and you definitely have to earn your stripes and work hard to find a path.
Yeah.
So my initial introduction to Nashville, one of the reasons that I moved here was for a opportunity that came up at a major recording studio here in town. And when I showed up for work the first day, I found out that opportunity had fallen through. So I had a lease on an apartment and was planning on using that job to kind of be the first stepping stone to get started in the industry. And when that fell through, it was a pretty deflating moment. And I remember walking out of that place and walking back down 16th Avenue to this little apartment that I had, and just really confused and distraught, trying to figure out, what am I going to do? Eventually that led to me taking a freelance, career path. And through doing that, I found a real passion in not only engineering, but in production and the idea of telling stories through sound. And that became the thing that really motivated me and gave me, I guess, a sense of purpose behind the work that I do.
That's cool. What was the school that you were at in Minneapolis?
It was a school called IPR.
Okay, cool. Yeah, Minneapolis is a little bit of a music city up there.
Oh yeah, the vibe there was great, man. Really great music and a great community.
What sort of inspired you in music growing up there? I mean, I've had guests like John Fields talk about his uncle who was producing music up in Minneapolis. And of course, the Prince of Purple is from there himself.
Right.
But and the Replacements. I mean, there's like a lot of great music that comes out of Minneapolis, a real sense of rock and roll and funk and groove.
Absolutely. Well, I moved to Minneapolis because of the school.
Okay.
But I
all right.
grew
So,
up in Detroit.
Right. Okay.
So
Okay.
my musical upbringing was very much around Motown and hip hop and rock and roll.
Right on.
And that was the early days. And my love for music really came from my father's love for music. He wasn't a musician necessarily. He could pick a couple songs on the guitar, but he was a huge fan of music, and he loved taking me to concerts. And those concerts ranged from Alan Parsons to Jimmy Page to Metallica to Snoop Dogg, Master P, Kid Rock, Semisonic, Matchbox 20.
Those are all concerts that your dad took you to?
Yeah. As a kid.
On. Wow. That's probably, that stands out just right there. I think my mom dropped me off at 2 Rush concerts back to back, and that was about it.
Yeah. He was a huge fan of music. And every time we were in the car, he's driving me around. He'd always have different kinds of music on, and some of which I appreciated at the time, others that, I didn't necessarily dig as much, but it was definitely an education in the different experiences that music can be a soundtrack for in life. And I found that through my dad's love for music, he found if he was out in the garage working on his car, he might listen to something. If he's, cruising around, it might be something different. And he was always really interested in exploring the different sounds in music. So I guess just subconsciously through being introduced to all different kinds of music growing up, that led me into this interest in how could I create unique sounds and be a part of what makes that happen. That's
cool. And then hearing you talk about walking down 16th Avenue, I mean, that really sets the scene for Nashville. These days, if you were to move to town and look for an internship in a studio and walk home, you might not be on 16th Avenue anymore because, it sounds like you arrived here at a time when Music Row was still a booming. And what is your take on that now? Do you feel like Music Row is still Music Row? Is it, I mean, I know it's changed, but do you have any thoughts about just the evolution of Nashville as a place?
Yeah, well, when I moved here, it was 2006, and I wouldn't necessarily say that Music Row was booming. Music Row was really like coming out of figuring out these massive changes that happened in the industry. And I think one of the big challenges that I had with taking the traditional career path in the recording studio at that time was that there weren't really jobs, and it was, I mean, I couldn't even get an internship. So there was, I didn't experience it in the 90s, you know,
Right.
But my view of how it's changed, I guess, I never really had the experience of looking at that location as being something that defined Nashville necessarily. The community is what defines Nashville, in my opinion.
Yeah.
And if that community gets spread out into different neighborhoods and places, as long as we maintain that level of camaraderie, I think that Nashville remains, you know, what it should be. And the growth that happens in Nashville, whilst there are some challenges that come with the loss of, you know, historic places and, you know, changing the way that the economy in the town works, if our community remains strong, I think that I've seen this growth in Nashville to provide more opportunities for our industry to grow and become more profitable. So it's been definitely an interesting thing to see.
Yeah, no, I like that, man. I like your enthusiastic encouragement to nurture the community aspect of what we're doing. And, you know, it's all about the people that are making music over, you know, the kind of the flash and the story and the, you know, the famousness of it all. What was it about Nashville? You know, there was an opportunity here in a studio, but I mean, like, you know, what you grew up with in Detroit, what does it mean to you, the way that you connected that to coming to the heart of country music? And do you feel like you moved here because of country music or are still involved in that world?
I moved here because of the pristine nature of Nashville recordings and the efficiency of the Nashville production process, or I should say proficiency, because the efficiency of it is not always a great thing, but the proficiency of Nashville, the musicians, it being a songwriting town, being focused on telling stories, which is something that has always been a big part of my connection to music.
Mm-hmm.
So that was really what drew me here. And before I moved here, I interviewed at every single commercial studio in town, trying to, you know, find an internship. And while I wasn't fortunate enough to be able to, you know, land one in the long term, what I learned from those conversations was people that were generally willing to give advice, to give encouragement. There wasn't anyone telling me, you know, you should probably look for somewhere else. You know, we don't have a job. This town probably isn't the right place for you. There were a lot of people giving me honest advice about how long it takes to be able to find your tribe in town and start to really build a, you know, substantial career. It just seemed like there was a lot of support in the community that I mentioned that I think is so important for us to continue to carry on that legacy, was something that I felt a strong connection to when I first had my initial experiences of being in Nashville.
Yeah, that's important. Well, I'm sure you acutely felt some of the challenges around that over the past few years. Not that we need to go into that, but it's good to feel like we're coming back out of that and we're starting to see some community again, you know?
Absolutely.
I like to ask guests to share an inspirational quote on the beginning of the show, something that has inspired you, or is there any individual that you have just found really inspiring? Anything you want to share with us?
Yeah, absolutely. You know, it's tough to pick one, I guess, because a daily practice of mine is to find some sort of motivational literature or content or something to sort of get my mindset in a place for the day and to expand the way that I think about things. Mm-hmm. But there's one that has stuck with me for the entirety of my career. Shortly after that initial internship that I moved here for fell through, and I made this focused intention about taking a freelance career path as opposed to waiting on the opportunity of the traditional path to arise. Mm-hmm. I bought a bunch of books on business and entrepreneurship and freelancing and wanted to learn as much as I could about how to position myself in a strong way to be able to have a career doing what I love. And I don't remember the book that I read this in, but I remember the quote vividly, and it's become my personal mantra, I guess you could say. It's by a philosopher named William James, and he said, "The best use of life is to use it for something that outlasts it."
Nice,
And the
short
first
and
time,
sweet.
yeah, it's so powerful, at least to me. When I read that, I stopped and I reread it, and there was something that just really hit my core with it. And what I recognize now, being able to look back on what felt so inspiring to me about that quote, is that it gave me a sense of purpose behind the potential that my future work would have. Being able to spend my life creating recordings that would be able to live beyond myself, to be able to capture thoughts and moments and experiences in an impactful way that would connect with the people that it's meant to connect with, and that would be able to extend beyond, my life. And so it gave me a really strong sense of purpose and a really strong motivation to push through any of the adversity that comes with this, crazy journey of working in the music industry.
Yeah, totally. Well, we will circle back on this for sure, but a critical or an integral part to what you just said is, it's one thing to record the music and put it down onto a hard disk or a cassette or a vinyl record somewhere, but or a CD, but it's quite another thing to actually get it out into the world so that it does survive and continue on and last beyond you. So we'll talk about that, the process of getting your music out there after it's been recorded during this podcast for sure. But I want to circle back. Before that, you talked about going into entrepreneurship because you wanted to pursue the thing you loved so much. And I wondered if you wanted to spend just another moment describing, what is it that you love? What aspect of music, what aspect of the things that interact with music, how do you define your own kind of personal mission statement around music?
Well, I think there's just something that it's always been a strong connection in my life. I found that music has been a soundtrack to all kinds of different experiences. It gets you through bad times. It makes good times better. And as you get into writing and playing music, there's a therapy that comes through it in a way of being able to become clearer and closer to your thoughts and understanding of yourself and the human perspective. And all of that has been something that since I was 12 years old, I was pretty certain that was going to be my career. It was either playing in the NHL, because I was a big hockey player when I was a kid, nice. or having a career in music. So there's never really been a question. I was really fortunate, I think, early on in my life to be introduced to great music through my dad, and going to all those concerts that he took me to. I think that also solidified the idea of the impact that this art that you create could have. Standing in a packed stadium and everyone just having a great time, or a room of tens of thousands of people going silent to listen to an artist just pour their heart out on their sleeve. It was just a moment that I wanted to be able to create something that would be able to have that same type of experience.
Yeah, that's funny. You remind me of a show I saw here, where there was this moment. She was up there. She's going to sing a song about. It was a cover or something like that, and it was just. I can't remember if she said beforehand, "This one's important for everybody to be quiet for a second," or if it just naturally happened. But I remember this moment where the entire packed club, and it wasn't a huge club, but it was still a lot of people. It could have been a very loud room, But everything got so quiet, you could just hear a pin drop in there, and it was remarkable. That's a great visual when you talk about just a stadium full of people just getting totally quiet together for a moment, and that, of course, translates into things like musical decisions, production. I talk about that stuff when I talk about what makes great bass in a recording. It's the quiet between the notes. So cool topics, man. And then I don't think you mentioned it yet, but did you pick up an instrument at some point in there? And is there a part of musical expression that is you as the musician?
Yeah, that's kind of an interesting story. So because my dad saw my passion for music as a whole, he suggested that I take some guitar lessons, or maybe gave it to me as a gift, and got me a cheap guitar and a couple guitar lessons. And I was really excited about playing the guitar, but I practiced quite a bit and I wasn't very good at it. And was just through athletics being something that was always a part of my life since I was very young. There's a level of just, working hard and seeing growth and that sort of thing. And it wasn't happening necessarily at the rate that I wanted it to. And my buddies around me were able to kind of shred some stuff, and we're just better players. So I got a little discouraged, and I decided that I didn't have the same passion for that as I did for music. But very quickly, I found that I was watching MTV Spring Break. And back in the day, MTV would have these big parties on, in Cancun and on these beaches, and they'd have these DJs spinning, and these huge crowds, and cute girls and everybody going wild. And I was like, man, that would be a lot of fun. And around that time, I was also really getting into the culture of hip hop, not just the music that was popular, but the history of it and the storytelling nature of it, and the combination of the music with graffiti and breakdancing and the whole culture around it. And being in Detroit, there's a very vibrant and proud hip hop scene. And so through all of that, I wanted to get into turntablism. So I found that Berkeley had a course that they had just developed that was the first collegiate course in the art of turntablism. And they had a book and a record set that you could buy, and they taught scratching through musical notation. And I was fortunate in elementary school to have music theory class, so I had a good understanding of the foundation of music theory. So I was able to take this book and these couple of records, and I saved up some money over one summer of cutting some lawns, and I bought a couple of cheap turntables and a little mixer and a few records, and started learning how to do remixes by taking break beats and cutting them together, and learn the art of scratching, and got really excited about that. And that eventually led me into not just that side of DJing, but performance DJing, where I got booked. I was in high school, I would do like the dances, and I would host the Battle of the Bands and that sort of thing. And then as I got a little older into college, I started doing weddings, and then when I moved to Nashville, the first actual job that I had was a club DJ downtown.
That's wild, man.
So that became my instrument, which was kind of an interesting thing, and I think is probably what started to lead me into production.
That's super cool, man. I love hearing that story. I remember myself also getting really fascinated by turntablism. I've never really attempted to learn it at all, but I just found it so intriguing. There were some great documentaries out about it. If I go back to the 2000s and stuff, I remember discovering all that stuff. And, it's been around for a long time. And I mean, it is most definitely an amazing art form. I saw some DJs come and do sets here in Nashville. I remember when I went to a show at some funky club that's probably not there anymore, been gone for a long time, but we just got to sit there and look through the little window, and, these guys were doing like scratching stunts back and forth around behind the back. And it's just like blown away by that. Did you ever get proficient at it in terms of being able to, is turntablism involved scratching, or is that sort of more like the DJ art form of syncing up your songs and that kind of thing?
I would say that turntablism is probably mostly described as the scratching side of things.
All right, dig it. When your band hits the studio, it's smart to have all the songs, mixes, and notes in one place. But figuring out how to share all the files can be frustrating. There's always somebody in the band who can't seem to log in or wants to use a different platform. Samply.app makes it easy to collaborate and communicate by creating a shared project so the whole band can get organized before the session. Just upload a voice memo, lyric sheet, song charts, photo, video, mixes, masters, or even invoices, and start commenting. Sign up for your free account now with 25 gigs of storage and unlimited projects, and use the coupon code RSR20 to get 20% off the first 3 months when you're ready to upgrade at Samply.app. The Spectra 1964 C610 complementer brings fast, clean, quiet compression and limiting to your recordings and mixes. The C610 includes the famous Spectra 101 amplifier used in legendary studios like Stax, Ardent, and Record Plant. I love my C610s for drums, vocals, guitars, and especially bass, which helps me get the perfect low end in my mixes. And you can make your mixes rock at Spectra1964.com. Can we ask a dumb question? How do you do it? If you were describing the basics of what scratching is to somebody else who's curious, what would you say?
Yeah, well, you have what they call like breakbeat records, and so after this became a thing, after probably in the 90s, after the big explosion in the 70s and 80s, companies started pressing vinyl that just had samples cut into it. So you'd have long, like white noise. You'd have like vocal drops, small, short break beats, like 1 to 2 measure, like drum grooves. And you could take each of these sounds, and by moving the record back and forth, as I assume most people have done at some point, you get that scratching effect. Now, what helps you create the turntablism side of it, where people are doing very unique rhythmic cuts and sounds that that you wouldn't be able to do just by moving a record back and forth. You have a mixer that has a crossfader on it, and that crossfader controls the amount of level that you hear from the left side turntable and the right side turntable. So I'm left-handed, so I would scratch with my left hand with the left side turntable typically. And if I have the crossfader all the way over to the right, the left side turntable is off. So if you slightly slide the crossfader over to the left and then move your hand forward or backward, you're going to hear just that sound. Then if you slide it back to the right, you don't hear the sound, so you can reposition the record. And once you start doing that very quickly, you can make percussive and rhythmic cuts and transform the sound that's on that record and through the sample by the rhythmic nature in which you move your record hand and your crossfader hand. And that's what creates those sounds.
I guess one of the questions I've always wondered about is if you're scratching on a sample on a record, let's say you've got a horn hit or something, or like an orchestral hit, and it's like, whatever kind of sound is there, you scratch that forward, and then when you're backing the record up again to get to the beginning of the sound, would you maybe move the fader to the other record for a moment, so you don't hear the backward part and you just hear the forward part? Or like what is some of the combinations of the actual scratch movement on moving the vinyl and when the fader is open so that you hear the record versus when the fader is on the other direction so that you don't hear the record in that moment?
Yeah, well, in the idea of like one of the standard, like very basic scratch sounds that people would hear a lot, where you take a kick drum and you would push the record forward, and then you would turn the crossfader so it turns that turntable off. Then you would pull it backward, and then you would turn that crossfader back over, and then push it forward. So you're only hearing the forward motion. And that's what creates like the put, kind of sound to it.
Right.
And then there's different combinations of that where, you could go forward, back, forward. And then there's different movements in which how you could move the crossfader while you're moving the record that would create more dramatic, different, cuts and all that.
That's cool, man. Have you ever had a chance to teach this stuff?
No, I haven't.
I guess I'm revealing how much of a geek I am, that I'm like totally fascinated. But like, if you're hearing like with the kick drum, then you're essentially doing double that move with your hands in the fader, because you have to like do a whole backward move in between them. Cool stuff, man. And then I was also reminded that wasn't one of the first tracks that featured scratching on it, wasn't that Rocket by Herbie Hancock? Do you know that one?
That's a very good trivia question. I know that there was a Herbie Hancock record that is associated with some sort of hip hop history lesson, but I'm not sure if that.
I think that's the one. Yeah. And Michael Beinhorn has been, he's been on the podcast. And that was one of his first records, as he got to help make Rocket. So wow. That's I'm an 80s kid, so there you go.
That's
Okay, cool,
awesome.
man. Awesome, dude. Well, I can appreciate all that stuff. My brother and I were way into, this sort of emergence of rap music in the 80s. My brother maybe more so than me because he bought a jam box and painted it multicolors and said pop top on it. And he bought vinyl for the garage, and we were trying to learn how to do backspins and Caterpillar, I guess the Caterpillar or whatever, which I would not try right now because I don't want to crush my more important private areas. But I'm definitely a fan of that. You were into this stuff and you were learning this, and yet you found your way down to Nashville. And I feel like I'm taking you on tangents, but I'd love to hear the connection for you about how this all sort of adds up to point you to Nashville. And, are you finding yourself doing a lot of country interaction in country music, or are you finding yourself doing a lot of work with artists that are, not in that kind of country genre and doing things outside of that here?
Well, when I first moved to town, initially, I was more in the hip hop and pop realm with the artists that I was working with. Not necessarily out of choice, but just out of like, those were the people that I could serve in the best way. What I found was that while there is a pretty vibrant hip hop talent base in Nashville, there wasn't at the time necessarily any studios that would specialize in that. And there were few engineers that that was something that they came up on doing. There were certain studios that maybe some of the hip hop artists would lean towards. Sometimes it was because they were more affordable or they were kind of more open to it. But a common thing that I started to learn once I started meeting some of the local hip hop artists and stuff was that they didn't have a commercial studio or even like a home studio with commercial quality or experience. It was kind of like their buddy that made beats had a mic, and so he would set it up, and they didn't have a lot of support from a like vocal production and creative, input sort of thing. And so I found this unique niche of an underserved market in Nashville. In the first maybe year of my freelance process, it was pretty heavily hip hop and pop focused, where I was building tracks and cutting and recording vocals. None of which was very like commercially prominent, stuff. But I found this really cool community that was in need of, that level of support. So I guess finding that niche was a valuable thing early on.
Yeah.
But I didn't necessarily move here like, for that. I moved here to be able to really refine my skills as an engineer and a producer and be focused on the art of sonic storytelling. So as my, I guess, network or relationships started to develop in town, I was able to start branching out into other genres. It kind of started with hip hop and pop artists, and then I got into working with a few rock bands. And it wasn't probably until a couple of years into being in Nashville that I started finding my tribe in the country side of things. And one interesting kind of story that led me into that, the first major country project that I worked on, I was scratching a record and did like a drum loop for it. And I had this buddy who ran a hot dog stand down 16th Avenue, across the street from Warner, right on the corner there. And he had this guy that came out, one day, and they were just kind of, talking, and he asked him if he happened to know any DJs that knew how to scratch, because he had this interesting idea for this country song that they wanted, some scratching on. And so he said, yeah, my buddy Gio, I've been doing some demos with him, and he's kind of a beachy singer-songwriter, type dude. So he introduced me to this guy, and the guy brought the hard drive down and gave me the session. And they said, yeah, we're looking for some scratches on this chorus thing, and looking for kind of like a hip hop drum beat to blend in with the live drums, through the track. And so I did that, and it was kind of my first venture into country stuff.
That's amazing, man. I love that story, dude. Have you ever scratched a banjo or a fiddle?
I'm trying to think if I have.
I feel like a fiddle would be easier, right?
What's that?
A fiddle would be easier because it's a bit more like that, but a banjo might be like a drum, scratching a drum beat or something. I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, I think both of them could be cool. I don't know that there's many breakbeat records that have banjo loops on them.
Come on, man.
But that's a cool idea. I should grab some old country records that I have and see.
Let's do it, man. Invite me over. I want to see it. So just a quick aside, rock stars, if we need scratching on a project, should we be calling you, Gio?
Yeah, I'd love to do it. It's definitely not the core of what I do anymore, but man, when I get the opportunity to, I love it.
I know it. I know you're here for a mission and a topic, and I keep derailing you with the scratching thing.
I actually did just do a scratching thing for. We did a theme song for the Titans for the playoffs.
Oh wow,
and,
cool!
And so I got to pull out the turntables and do some scratching for that.
Nice. I bet the Predators. You've got like the fangs. Those are like strings, right? Evil strings. You could probably scratch those. That'd sound cool.
Yeah.
Rockstars, Rockstars, if you're listening to this right now and you are able to drop a comment in somewhere, drop a comment in and tell us what would make for good scratching. That's what we want to know. Okay. So, I think we're headed that direction. So you started to connect with people in the country scene and see some ways to connect this interest in hip hop and turntablism and, your skill set and find a tribe in country music. So, was there kind of an aha moment for you here in Nashville or in Music City with all this stuff where things started to click and you sort of saw the path forward?
My honest question to that is that there wasn't, but I kept searching for one.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that what I've learned through my career so far is that we think that there's going to be this moment where like that breakthrough thing happens, but I think it's just a series of lessons that we learn along the way, and then opportunities that lead to another thing. And I think recognizing when things connect together is a really strong value to have. But I'm still searching for that moment where I feel like I've broken through, or there was that thing where everything really connected. I think I just try to learn every day and then adjust as needed to be able to be of value to the people around me.
Yeah, well, clearly this is the breakthrough right here, right?
Yeah. Oh, this opportunity.
Yeah, this podcast. This is going to be the breakthrough right here.
Yeah, man. Well, that's the right answer. There you
go. Okay, cool. Well, what about getting to? How far do we want to jump forward to get to the point of you beginning the record shop, Nashville, and doing what you're doing now? So, Rockstars, we have links in the show notes, so please click down and scroll through, and you can go see the website where Gio is basically, I'm going to just be honest, you're like welcoming the shit out of people to come make records and music with you and showing off the studio, and it's it's a cool vibe, man. So, how did you come up with that? How long have you been doing the record shop, and what's it all about?
Well, the idea of the record shop stemmed out of this necessity that I felt internally to be able to find a way to be able to make a living doing what I love when I wasn't able to follow that traditional career path. And that was probably the biggest aha moment that led me to the record shop, was recognizing that if I continued to wait around until someone gave me a chance to be an intern, to work my way up, I would then work my way up, and then I would rely on them again to be able to hire me as an assistant. And then I would rely on someone else to hire me as a staff engineer. And then I would rely on that studio to be successful in order for me to have continued work. But what I guess positive perspective that came out of this job falling through that I moved here for was that I recognized the freedom that I had, that if I was willing to put in the work to go after it, that I could have control over my future as much as a human has the possibility to do. I could at least have control over the choices that I make and how I spend my time and what I focus on to be able to drive my career in the way that I personally hope that it would be. And that's what led me to saying, okay, the freelance thing is cool. And it was starting to kind of pick up a bit. I was getting a few like gigs here and there, but it mainly just, kind of doing demos, singer-songwriter demos, cutting vocals on a track, doing programming, that kind of thing. But I felt like in order for me to be able to expand and kind of grow and get past the first ceiling that you get when you first start, kind of moving into a higher level of production and a higher level of artist. I didn't have the mentor that was a, prolific legend in the industry that I could learn under. I didn't have a studio that I trained at to learn it, to have as leverage. I didn't have any major credits. So through a lot of the reading that I did, I thought, well, maybe if I can create a philosophy, a process, an experience that is different and unique for artists, that and support them in a way that I want to, and that maybe other studios aren't in the same way, and try to think of a new way of approaching how an engineer or how a studio could operate, that then I would have a different side of leverage, I guess, or interest in someone wanting to work with me.
Yeah, you were looking for a different niche.
Yeah, totally. Finding a niche, I guess.
Yeah.
So I got really focused on determining what my purpose was, what my mission was behind the work that I do, and how I could market myself, which isn't, the sexiest word in a creative, career, but a very important thing to focus on, how I could market myself and brand myself in a way that would help me be able to at least be in the conversation with someone that had the credits that I don't have, because I was coming at it from a different, perspective that might intrigue the artist in exploring that possibility. So through doing that, that's where the idea of the record shop came from. The name stemmed from just a series of questions that I was asking myself, like, what do I do? And so I came up with the idea, well, I make records. And if we're making records, we could be a record shop. So the idea of the record shop is not necessarily the place where you go in and listen and buy records. It's the place where records are created.
Right.
And,
right.
But then the natural, thing of the record shop being the cool place where the community comes together to experience new things, that sort of came together. And I thought it was kind of a cool, vibe.
Yeah.
And
not like the shop where you go shopping for records, but like the shop, like the wood shop where we're making the records.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah. Can I ask you a question before you continue? So, what is it about you that, you clearly had like a self-starter attitude about this stuff. Do you feel like you came into it with a self-starter foundation, or is this something that you just had to learn how to become a self-starter and an entrepreneur through necessity?
A little bit of both. So when I was young, my parents were definitely ones that helped prepare me for this, and whether they knew it or not, they were the story that comes to mind is when I was maybe 6 or 7 years old. I wanted a swing set in the backyard, and my dad said, "Well, we'll get you a swing set, but we have this neighborhood garage sale coming up, and we'll help you set up a lemonade stand, and you can put the lemonade stand down at the end of the driveway, and you can make a little sign for it. You got to make the lemonade. We'll get you the supplies for it. And whatever money you make from that lemonade stand, I'll take you to the store, and you can pick out what you can afford through that little business that you can have over the summer." And so I clearly didn't make enough money from selling 5-cent glasses of lemonade to buy, even a chain for a swing set. But I think it was a really strong lesson that they taught me about, earning things and putting in the work, to be able to get something. And they continued with that type of support throughout my childhood. If there was something that, if when I was, they fronted me the money to buy my first set of turntables, and I signed a contract with them that I would pay them back in increments based on the money that I could make from cutting lawns. And I determined how many lawns I had to cut a week in order to be able to pay them back by the end of the summer. And so I had those types of experiences, but I didn't think when I moved to Nashville, I'm going to be an entrepreneur. I'm going to start a business. I thought that the way that you get into the industry is getting an internship, apprenticing under a master craftsman, working your way up, gaining the experience that you need, and basically, climbing the ladder. That's what I read about the engineers that I looked up to and how they found, their path from Al Schmidt to Alan Parsons, starting by sweeping the floors and then becoming a tape op and assistant and then engineering. So that was what I was focused on. I didn't move here with the intention of starting a business. But once I was in that position where I made that determination that I needed to take action if I wanted to be able to, survive here, I was very grateful that I was given that type of education when I was a kid. That definitely prepared me for being in that position.
Yeah. If you're ready to upgrade your studio to the famous sound of API's large format consoles, then you're ready for the Box, a small format console featuring the same analog circuitry and original 2520 op-amp design that made API famous for more than 50 years. Record through 8 world-class mic pre-channels, mix through 24 smooth as glass faders, and upgrade your home studio to legendary status. API now offers a virtual console experience, allowing you to get a personalized online demo of the Box at apiaudio.com. ATOM Audio introduces the all-new A7V monitor with rotatable HPS waveguide for the accelerated ribbon tweeter and advanced onboard DSP-based room correction using the included A-Control software or optional SonarWorks software and measurement mic, allowing you to tune your speakers for your room, your mix position, and your ears anytime you want. Get the extended 5-year warranty for monitors that will improve as your studio improves at atomaudio.com. Well, it reminds me of Bob Olson, who was an early guest on the podcast. This was probably going back to the first 20 episodes I did or so. And he started out at 14 in Motown and was, I think, the only person who held every engineer position at Motown Studios right there in Detroit. So you're definitely talking about a tradition of working your way up through, a studio environment. But it's cool to hear how you started your own thing. So let's talk about that a little bit now. What is the record shop now? What kind of mission? Like, who is it that you're reaching out to? And if they get there, what are they going to find?
The mission at the record shop is to help artists achieve their artistic vision and create art that will outlast us. And nice. I'm sure you can guess from the second half of that statement that it comes from that quote that has been my personal mantra throughout my life. Mm-hmm. The first half of it came from the experience of starting as an engineer, but working with artists that didn't have a producer and didn't really have enough experience to really even know like what a producer would do or what production would, but needed creative support in the process. So, songwriter wants to lay down a demo, but they're not really sure on they're kind of floating between a couple different tempos and maybe the transitions between different, sections, or they have a 45-second long solo, but they're trying to write a pop song. So they need that support to be able to hone in their creative ideas and get the point across. So I found early on that while I was hired a lot as an engineer at first, I started to become a producer or co-producer or creative supporter with the artists that I was working with through that. And I found that what really fulfilled me about the work that I was doing early on was the excitement that someone would get once that idea was put down on tape or on a disc. And we were able to listen back to it, and they were like, "Man, this is exactly what I had in mind. This feels, perfect." And so I thought about when I was figuring out, what is the mission for what the record shop is going to intend to do. I wanted to combine my personal purpose with the thing that I get the most fulfilled around, and that started to become the focus on the way that we work. So while the record shop now exists as a physical recording studio and a production company, when I first started it, I had an apartment on 16th Avenue. I didn't have a studio. So the record shop was more focused on the production process. And my production process has always been very focused on pre-production for the sake of me getting inside the artist's head and learning what their creative vision is before I start filling in the colors too much. I want to really understand where the artist wants to take something and then help support them on that journey. And then as I started to get this idea around the record shop, the other thing that I didn't necessarily have an interest in was like opening a traditional commercial studio that is sole purpose is to rent studio time, because that wasn't what I personally wanted to do. I wanted to work on really cool, interesting projects, and I didn't necessarily want to have to rely on just filling in the hours throughout the week with one session after another in order to have a business thrive. So through a project that I did while I was in audio school, they made us come up with a unique business model for a studio or production company, any sort of like audio business. And my model was to create a production company that would be a recording studio, a artist development incubator, kind of thing, that would have visual production involved in it through video and photography, and then also like rehearsal space and stuff. So the one thing that I haven't done is created that whole rehearsal thing involved in it. But through that, I guess, exploration, I thought that a strong way for me to be able to set my work apart would be to be able to focus on this unique process, I guess, and being highly focused on pre-production and not necessarily relying on the maybe more traditional Nashville thing of like efficient, really quick, do as many songs as we can in 3 hours, kind of process, but having more preparation on the front end to be able to then allow those musicians to be able to come in and have the time to find their moments in the process.
Yeah.
So that's kind of where it stemmed from and what my intention was.
Yeah. Well, Nashville's definitely a place that prides itself on that ability to crank out a bunch of songs at once. And for some situations that can be the right move for sure. And it can be pretty impressive when that happens. But there are plenty of situations. And I like how you differentiated yourself against what Nashville studios or demo studios were known for. It's like, if Nashville studios were known for efficiency, you were wanting to focus on proficiency, which is like, I guess if, maybe I'm stretching the terms here, but this idea of taking an artist that needs other things, that needs a little more attention and care around the pre-production and the getting ready stage. So have you transitioned yourself to where have you sort of, do you work with other engineers now in the studio when you're recording in that fashion of saying, I'm actually going to replace myself? Like, if I used to press all the buttons, I'm going to move over here to the side and replace myself in that job so that I can now focus on this production and pre-production job? Or do you still find yourself being able to wear multiple hats?
Well, I always wear a lot of hats. If you see me anywhere,
That's
you see
true.
I'm a huge hat fan. We actually just took a really cool picture the other day with all my hats, and I can't wait to show it to people. That's fun.
Cool. And when you were talking about growing up in Detroit, that was the thought that came to mind. I was like, the vibe, like the red suit, the red hat, and the whole look. I was like, that's totally a kind of a Detroit, and there's the appreciation of style that comes from a hip hop background too.
Yeah, man, for sure. But that's a very good question and a very important thing to discuss. The decision to start delegating things is very challenging, but also very valuable to figure out. And I was a little slow to do that once I was in a point where, I was making a reasonable living from solely, production, and had my second iteration of the record shop, which was more of a home-based, smaller, mid-size format studio. I was at a point where I was taking on all the work almost out of this like scarcity, like fear of scarcity, where like you never know when the calls are going to stop, and okay, things are finally going pretty smooth. I feel like I just need to keep taking it on so I can invest in more equipment and then eventually buy a building. And I don't know that I can afford to pay someone to do these things. But then I started to find that I was able to do better work, and also be able to bring in more revenue for my business when I started delegating things that I didn't necessarily have to be 100% hands-on with. So that was a really challenging thing to do. But once I did that, it opened up opportunity for me to be more creative in certain ways, and then to not have to solely rely on myself for everything. So current day, yes, I have multiple engineers, video directors, photographers, designers that I work with on a weekly basis.
Nice.
Some of which are here daily, some of which I work, project by project. But I have a great, going back to the community of Nashville, there's so much talent here. And when you find the people that you really creatively connect with and can kind of create that, that circle around you of people to work with, it can provide so much value to the artists that you're working with. And it's just allowed me to be able to really focus on what I love doing and delegate the things that maybe I don't need to be as directly involved in, to give me more capacity to be able to take on the things that are really important.
Yeah, that's great advice. Before we pivot to another topic, let me dig into that just a little bit more. So, two big challenges that I'm aware of when it comes to delegation. One is, and this is a question that somebody's going to ask me if I've done it, or you if you've done it, is like, how do you do that? How do you delegate something that you've put a lot of care and attention into over to somebody else? What is a process? What are some smart lessons learned about how to take the task that you did and hand it over to somebody else and step back and trust that it'll get done right? And then the next part of that question is, let's say you've done that one time and you've like, all right, I found somebody, they're great. And then you start thinking, yeah, but what happens if they get sick, or they're like unavailable, or, they got to go on a trip and they just can't do it for months or something like that? How do you begin that process of having more than one person to help you out in certain roles so that you have redundancy built into your business?
Well, I think something that I do, something that I do is I respond to every single email that I get about internship, part-time work, working at the studio, and ask people to tell me what their specialties are. Mm-hmm. And I do that for a couple of reasons. I found that personally, I started to find more opportunities in that world once I started to specify what my specialties were. So it's a little bit of like giving them some advice, but also because I can keep in mind the people that mention that they have a specific thing that they're really great at, and then test them out on something. So I try to focus on finding, those people. If you're not in a position where you're getting multiple emails every week from people that are looking for, work and stuff, and you need to more seek it out, I ask for colleagues for, referrals. I always have a couple interns on staff that are here to be not here to be janitors or bathroom attendants. They're here to sit in on sessions, to learn, be a part of the process. And so through that type of experience, I think that they get the training that they need in order to be valuable for the things that I need, because they're involved in the process enough to be able to learn. Which is something that is fairly uncommon in most commercial studios.
Yeah. Yeah. And I've noticed that my interns as well really appreciate that. And I always stress that it's like, when you're here, you're right in the middle of things. There is nowhere in my studio to be hidden from the process. So you're in it. So, have your head in it, be attentive, be focused. And I've also noticed that when interns are in the studio, that like, all interns are just, they're people. So everybody's a little different, and everybody's got different strengths. And some people like really, they love a certain aspect of the process, whether it's the audio, or maybe there's the video stuff, or maybe there's the business side of it, or maybe they're just really good with people, or maybe they're just really good on an instrument. And I try to, like you said, I try to get to know what their strength is so that I can help create opportunity for them in that direction. And I know there might be philosophies that go the opposite. They say like, oh, well, then where their strength isn't is where they should learn more. But I just feel like people gravitate towards the things that, that's what they're driven to want to do. And you can find amazing skills in interns. I've had interns that I thought I wasn't sure what they might have to offer on a session, and then they reveal something, and then they become like a fantastic asset for a session or working with people or whatever. It's pretty cool. Have you ever wished you could remove the click-track bleed from a singer's vocal mic, the sound of shuffling feet from a full choir, or clicking noises from the valves of an otherwise brilliant trumpet solo? These are just some of the incredible things I have been able to clean up, edit, or remove from a recording using the magic of iZotope RX. Great for mixing with a collection of plugins for your DAW to manage plosives, clicks, S's, noise, buzz, reverb, breaths, and even guitar fret squeaks, with the set it and forget it simplicity that lets you focus on your creativity in this studio while you let iZotope handle the audio challenges. You can even adjust your vocal, bass, and drum levels inside of a finished stereo mix using the wizardry of rebalance. RX is truly magical. Try out the subscription option with an extended 30-day free trial at iZotope.com/rockstars or use the coupon code ROCK10 to get 10% off any individual plugin purchase. OWC now brings you the Mini Stack STX, the world's first Thunderbolt 4 certified storage and hub expander, perfectly sized to stack with the Mac Mini and the ideal storage and connectivity companion for Thunderbolt or USB-equipped computers and devices. With a universal SATA HDD SSD bay and NVMe M.2 PCIe SSD slot, you can expand your Mini's storage capacity to gigantic proportions. 3 Thunderbolt USB-C ports enable you to connect to millions of Thunderbolt, USB, and future USB 4 drives, displays, AV mixers, cameras, and tablets, as well as desktop accessories like a keyboard, card reader, or mouse. I'm using the Mini Stack STX paired with my Mac Mini M1 to house my dedicated audio SSD and sample libraries, and it works great in my studio. Find the new Mini Stack STX and all your storage needs at macsales.com/rockstars. Hey, Rockstars, we're back now for the jam session. My guest today is Sean Giovanni from the record shop, Nashville. And Gio, are you ready to jam, my friend?
Let's do it.
All right, cool, man. I like the short for Giovanni, Gio. It's cool. It's very global, right?
Yeah, man. It started when I was young. And I think just from sports, everybody calls you by your last name. So people started calling me Gio.
Right.
I moved to Nashville and I introduced myself to everyone and say my name is Sean because nobody knows me as Gio. And I thought it'd be a weird thing, like what, G what,
Right.
And then within a few weeks, everybody that I've now met or hanging out with is calling me Gio. So I just gave up. I just introduced myself as Gio or Giovanni.
It's funny. I've gone through the name change a number of times. I always went by Elijah growing up. And then when I moved down here, I was like, it's time for a change. It's too hard to explain how to pronounce my name. So I started going by Eli. And then later I was working with a rock band and I watched them all adopt these rock stage names, and I was like, I want to do that. So I went back to my original nickname, which is Lidge. And that's where I've been, and it's like, it's sort of funny how you have to, it's funny how you can do that. I mean, why not change your name? Do what you want. I love it.
Yeah,
all right. Well, so let's see. I was talking about delegating and stuff and different intern skill sets and how you can be really amazed by what somebody has to offer if you sort of relax a little bit and just give people a chance to sort of show you what they've got to show you. And you started to comment on that or continue with that.
Absolutely. Well, it brought a lesson that I learned to mind. I think that in addition to what you just said, asking people what they specialize in is a strong thing because most people don't think about that. I didn't, at least early on. I just thought I need to know as much as I can about everything. So when the situation arises where I can be valuable, I can step in and do that, Mm-hmm. But I think all of us have, based on our personalities and our skill sets and the way that our brain works, have certain things that within the audio professional spectrum that we probably do better than others and that we do better than a majority of people maybe. And so when I moved to town, my focus was I'm a really hard worker. I've known this is what I've wanted to do most of my life. I am willing to do anything. Please give me an opportunity. And that fell on deaf ears. I didn't get the emails back. I didn't get phone calls back. I never got an internship. And then I was fortunate enough to be hanging out at Funhouse Studios here in town. And there was an engineer there that was letting me sit in on a session. It was a demo session for country songwriter. And the engineer had to take a break or a phone call or something. And I had been hanging out a little bit there, so we knew each other a little bit. And he got to know a little bit about me, and he knew I could operate Pro Tools pretty well. So he said, "Hey man, can you fly around some vocals here while I go take a break, and I'll be right back." And so I did that for him. I took and by fly around, I mean taking one chorus, copying it, and pasting it to another chorus.
Yeah.
Which is fairly common in quick form, demo production type world. And so I did that pretty quickly, a lot quicker than he thought that it could probably be done. So I went in the lounge. He's like, "Hey man, I got that done. You need me to do anything else while you're taking a break?" And he looked at me a little confused, almost like I didn't understand what he had asked me to do, and came back in the control room and looked at it and was like, "Dude, how'd you do that fast? That's crazy."
Nice.
And so I had done something in 15 seconds that him being someone that Pro Tools was new to, but to me, Pro Tools was like the only thing other than a 4-track cassette recorder that I had experience with. I had learned some ways, and through working on a lot of hip hop records where vocals are copy and pasted quite a bit, I had learned a technique that isn't super magical, but is just very fast at being able to figure out where a spot needs to be copy and pasted to. And so I was able to do that a lot quicker. And that I never worked for that studio. That engineer never hired me for anything, but the manager of the songwriter was in the back of the room. And after the session, came up to me and said, "Hey man, it looks like you're pretty good with that software. I got this record that's going out to mix, and I need some editing done before we send it off. Is that something you could help me with?" And I was like, "Absolutely." You got a hard drive? And I brought him down to my place on 16th, and we went up there and he showed me the stuff that they needed edited and prepped for this project. And it turned out to be a record for Jimmy Hall, who's a legendary, blues artist. And that was my first major credit on a record. That situation was a really strong epiphany to me that I needed to quit trying to be everything to anyone and focus on what I was really good at, that set me apart from the oversaturated group of people that were looking for opportunity in the in the industry. So from that point on, I focused on in that portion of my career, I focused on my conversations with people as I'm a very proficient Pro Tools operator and editor. I'm really good at cutting vocals and in editing vocals and comping vocals. I can work really efficiently and make your process smoother. And I started focusing on that. And then that opened up so many doors and opportunities. So for the folks that say, if you're, you got your thing that you're good at, go find something that you're not as good at. I would say it depends on where you're at in your career. But I found that I personally needed to zero in on what I was naturally had the most experience in and was really good at in order to find those initial kind of breakthrough opportunities.
Yeah, I think it's great. And you reminded us that a natural process is for, the old guard of us to have gotten good at the systems that have worked for us for a while. And so we stick to those. And then the next, the young generation comes in like you did and adopts the newest, latest technology and starts figuring out ways to use it, especially if it's the thing that was accessible. And so therefore you become an expert in it, or you gain skills in it that then become valuable to the people that are already making records. And another good takeaway is just that reminder, I don't know if anybody ever really tells a story about I was a young guy and I sat down and my mix was killer, so therefore they hired me. It's it's always, it's always I sat down and I could edit. Was blazing fast at editing on Pro Tools. And so they wanted me because the opportunities that are out there when we're starting out, they're looking for I mean, they may never know they're looking for it, but they would love to have somebody come in and take some of the sort of, the pain in the ass work off their plate a little bit. And for somebody who's focused on the bigger production or the mix or whatever, maybe, and maybe Pro Tools or whatever other software comes along that's sort of new at that time, they might consider they want to use it, but the technique of using it is a little bit of a pain and a distraction for them. So having that skill set as the new person in the room is a great way to find opportunity for yourself, like you did.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
Yeah. And then what else was I going to say about that? Oh yeah. Can you reveal to us what your secret copy paste trick was for vocals?
Oh yeah. So, I mean, I'll try to without having a visual. But so let's say that the chorus starts on measure 18 of your track. By using the backslash button on the numerical keypad of a full-size keyboard, you can cycle through the start, end, and length time of the selection. So if you highlight the vocal or just click on the vocal track, you can very quickly, with a cursor, you can very quickly press the backslash button. And then I usually just grab a measure before the downbeat of whatever section I want to paste it to. So I would press the backslash button. I would type in 17, and then I would press the backslash button 3 times to set the length. And then the length, you can see on the screen, maybe it's 10 bars, 8 bars, copy. And then by being aware of your session and having markers set up, you can see that the next chorus starts, let's say, at bar 48. So I press the backslash button on the numeric keypad, type in 48, and press paste. And you can very quickly fly vocals around a session just by glancing up at the screen and pressing a couple buttons.
That's cool,
Never
man.
touch the mouse.
That's a great tip. I might have to try that. I don't think I've used the backslash in Pro Tools yet. Is that the one that's right above the return key?
Well, it would be on the numerical keypad of the
okay, right next
keyboard.
to the above number 9.
Doesn't work on the one on the return key. You have to have the full size keyboard.
Okay, cool, great, very cool. And the cool thing and reminder about that is the really fast moves in Pro Tools are often things where you don't have to use the mouse. Right? You didn't use the mouse in that situation?
Yeah, the only thing you would have to use the mouse for is just clicking on the track, just so your cursor's on the track, and then the rest of it can happen through with the keyboard. And that's something that I had, my first Pro Tools instructor gave me a suggestion for. He said, anytime that you have to click on the screen to select something, look on that drop-down menu and see if there's a key command next to it. And instead of clicking on that, unclick off that menu, use the key command to do whatever it is, and then write it down. And so when I was in school, I made these note cards of all the key commands as I started to learn which ones I would need to use just by operating Pro Tools and experimenting and stuff. And then I made this agreement with myself that I wouldn't click on anything that had a key command for it. And if I couldn't remember what it was, I'd go look it up and then do it. And you do that enough, over hours and hours of hundreds, thousands of hours of work in the software, and it starts to just become second nature.
I like the idea of a note card too, because I often find myself writing it down on a piece of paper, but it's hard to keep 8.5 by 11 pieces of paper around the studio handy. And it'd probably be a lot easier to keep a little note card holder with little flashcards in it, just kind of like add
those
to
are
it
great.
as you go,
And now they have note card apps on your phone. So when I work with students, I have them do that, and then they create a database on their phone with a note card app, and then they can quiz themselves when they're just hanging out instead of scrolling TikTok or something.
Yeah, that's a good idea. That's a good idea too. The only struggle I ever have with apps is sometimes, while apps seem so promising, the number of clicks it takes to just get into your phone and pull it up sort of becomes the obstacle that I don't feel like crossing over in that moment.
Mm-hmm.
But okay,
there's
cool.
also something to be said for the subconscious process of writing something down with a pen.
Absolutely, 100%. You're writing it by hand, and then trying to remember what the hell does that symbol mean. Okay, so now let's start diving into the fun stuff, man. So here you are. You've built this world that allows you to work with a bunch of talented people that can help you with other aspects of the music making process that you personally didn't gravitate towards as much because you wanted to gravitate towards more of the artist development and the working with the people and the production and stuff like that. So when you start out in a production with an artist, what does that process look like to you? Is there sort of a signal flow for a new artist coming in and working with you and ultimately releasing a record?
Yeah, absolutely. It depends on the artist, the level that they're at and where the connection is coming from. I would say that probably 90 to 95% of the projects that I work on come from a referral from a colleague in the industry. So they're usually vetted or already, at least that like they're referred to me because someone else that knows me really well thinks that I'm a good fit for them. So I'm in a fortunate position now to have a lot of those relationships where the right artists are being sent to me. I still get a lot of, like kind of cold call, interest and stuff. And in that process, the interview or the first date stage is a little bit more, involved. In both cases, I want to know, the first thing that I want to know is what is the intention of your artistic intention with the project that you would like me to work on with you. I want to know what the goal is that that the artist has. And if they have an idea yet about what the message is, what the intention is, whether that's around the theme of the songs or if it's around the sonic, side of it. And then that can help me determine whether I feel like I'm creatively connected with it and if I feel like I can do their vision justice.
Mm-hmm.
Once we determine that's the case, then I start with the songs, most important part of the process. If we don't have great songs, you can make interesting sounds, but I want to tell a story, and that story's got to start with a great lyric and great melody. So I like to hear the songs. If they've picked out the songs already for the project, then I want to hear those. But I also ask them, even if okay, look, I've written, I read 100 songs last year. I picked out these 6 that I'm going to work on. I still want to hear at least 50 of the 100 that you feel like are in line with your artistic intention. And the reason for that is that I just want to know more about where the artist is at creatively right now, or at least, recently. I want to get into their catalog a little bit more, even if that may not have been and sometimes I find a song that they kind of got tired of because they wrote it so far away from their new favorites that they wrote. And I kind of beg them could we just explore this one a little bit? I see some potential in it. But for the most part, I just want to really understand who they are as an artist. So that's like the beginning of my, pre-production process, I guess. And then we dive into more. Now we have the songs picked out. Let's talk about the instrumentation, the approach that we're going to take with recording. Is this put a band in the room and play it down live kind of thing? If so, are we going to rehearse with that band beforehand? Do you already have a band? Am I hiring the band?
Right. And by the way, don't you think record scratching would be really good on this record?
Yeah. Try to work it in wherever you can.
That's right. And you'd always get a yes from me.
With a big part of, modern production, I guess, is the decision to incorporate, synthetic instrumentation versus organic instrumentation.
Yeah.
Programmed stuff, whether that's drums or synths or just, unique sounds and that kind of thing. And so I want to know where the artist is thinking, sonically on that. And sometimes the artist doesn't know the proper vocabulary for it. So this actually happened maybe a week ago. The artist was giving me references of songs that they feel like they really connected with sonically. But they were all pretty heavily programmed, meaning there's not a lot of live playing top to bottom on it. But her idea was that she wanted to have live instrumentation, so it had a live feel to it. But I think what she was hearing more in the programming was that the sounds were just more organic, and they had treatment that gave it more of an ambient, open kind of sound to it. But it wasn't a drummer playing the song top to bottom. Mm-hmm. It was a drum machine with sounds that were sampled in an organic way. And there's a difference between how we would approach a production, based on that. Yeah. So if her vision is to have that type of feel then I know that if I were to just say, okay, cool, and just throw a live drummer on it, it may not land where she thought it would. So having those discussions and investigating the different vocabulary that different people might use to describe something, I think is really important. And that's a big part of my, initial process.
Yeah.
Then once I have a strong vision for that, we would get into the arrangement, instrumentation, and then laying out a blueprint for our production plan.
Very cool. Now, if you're doing program drums, would this have been a situation where it's programmed drums, but the drums play parts that somehow give the impression that it's parts that a drummer would play on a song? As opposed to something where it's just a loop that just kind of continues on forward. Sometimes programmed drums can play the right kind of fills and accents and things like that.
Yeah, I mean, I think it depends upon the style of the project, but I would say generally, if it has that more organic thing, then if while I'm programming, I'm thinking more about like how would a drummer play this? I'm maybe leaving out certain hi-hat subdivisions because the crash is hitting, or not playing things that would. It still has synthetic samples to them, but I'm thinking about it like, does this feel a little bit more natural in the way that like a live drum set, would sound?
What
Not
are
all the
some
time,
of the,
but just depends upon the intention.
Yeah. What are some of the tools that you use when you are programming drums, and what are some of the methods that work really well for you that you find yourself going back to?
Well, I like sound-wise, I like to not get stuck on like having templates around things, and I do the same thing for mixing. I refuse to work off of a template. So I have a very organized database of samples that I pull from. I would say that I mainly use Battery in Native Instruments for organizing those samples based on the song. But I don't have like preset kits that I've built for different vibes, which isn't a bad thing if someone does, but I just really like having an open canvas where I can just think in my head, like, what is this supposed to sound like? And then just chase down the sound until, I put it together.
Okay. So can I ask you some questions about that? Cause I actually just got Battery 4 and sort of, I had it years ago, and then I got it again, and I'm excited about it. So with Battery, Rockstars, if you're not using it, you've got all these slots. You can kind of have a grid. You can have a big grid or a small grid of, what look like drum pads. And in fact, you can make the grid look like the same shape and size of whatever your drum trigger pad is, so that it's really easy to drop something on there and then hit the pad and there's the sound. Gio, stop me if I'm describing it wrong, but this is my understanding of how this thing works. And so if you want to bring sounds in from elsewhere and drop them in, I think you can do it right from Finder. You can just grab a sample and just drag and drop it right onto a pad on Battery. Is that right?
Yeah, you can.
Can you do that can you take a little clip right out of a track on a session and do the same thing? Or do you have to export it and bring it in that way?
That's a good question. I don't know that I've tried that.
All right, there you go. Well, I'm asking the wrong question because clearly you haven't needed it yet. But all right, so if you're organizing stuff, what does that mean to you? Does that mean folders on hard drives in Finder, or are there any other kind of like drum sample organizing tools that you might use to find a sound and then bring it into Battery?
The main thing that I when I speak of organizing is just on a hard drive, but with folders that are organized and that are titled properly. If there's a new database of samples that I find, that I make sure that I organize them within a file structure that I'm going to be able to discover and find if I'm looking for it.
50 years ago, William G. Dilley introduced the world to his revolutionary new dynamics processor, the Model 610 Complementer. A truly unique device, the Model 610 was not only the fastest, cleanest, and quietest of its type, but was also capable of providing completely separate peak limiting and compression functions. Today, Spectra 1964 introduces the Model C610 Complementer, described as the most versatile piece of audio gear you can buy. great for adding control and power to everything from vocals, guitars, and bass to mixing and even mastering, the C610 gives you the same massive sound that rocked legendary studios like Stax, Ardent, Advision, A&M, and Record Plant. It even has enough gain to function as a mic preamp. I'm using the C610 on every record I make at the Toy Box Studio, and you should too. You'll love it. Go to Spectra1964.com or call 801-797-0642. So you just finished an awesome mix and sent it off to the band, but the singer texts you with lyric changes, the drummer emails you wanting a different fill, and the bass player DMs you about a wrong note in the chorus. But which mix version were they talking about anyway? Don't you wish there was an easier way? Samply.app comes to the rescue as your ultimate mix assistant, streaming full resolution audio so your clients can easily listen and send notes from their mobile phone on the road or the computer back at the studio. All mix comments are time-stamped directly onto the correct mix version with no confusion, and you also get A/B listening capability with synchronized playback and level matching for easy mix comparison, all inside Samply. It's file sharing that was built specifically for music, and it all works inside your browser with no downloads required. Sign up now for your free account with 25 gigs of storage and unlimited projects, and use the coupon code RSR20 to get 20% off the first 3 months when you're ready to upgrade at samply.app. Okay, give us a couple of tips on that. Like, let's say there's Hot City Sounds comes and you just get this new one and you're like, oh, these are cool. What do you do with that big folder of stuff? Do you take all the kicks out and put them in separate kick folders, or do you just have like the Hot City Sounds folder in a bigger folder, and then within that, you know where to go find some kicks and snares? Do things have to get tagged so that you can find all the kicks that you own on your whole studio all at once?
Yes, you could do that. I found that to be a very time-consuming process that wasn't necessarily speeding up my workflow. Mm-hmm. So I don't have things organized in that way, but I have them organized in. So let's say that I get a library. I'll use That Sound library because it's a really great, great company. Yeah. Started in Nashville too. It's, strong part of our community. Mm-hmm. And so generally speaking, they don't have like unusable sounds in their database. Their stuff is really strong. So their folder just has all the libraries that I've bought from them, and I go to their folder if there's a certain sound that I want to get out of one of their libraries. But let's say that I find like a trap like hi-hat like preset pack or something, mm-hmm. and there's a certain sound that I'm trying to chase down that I've heard somewhere, and I want to try to find it. So that pack comes with 30 different hi-hat sounds, but there's only 2 of them that gravitate towards me. I take those and put them into a trap hi-hat folder. And I did that recently when I was trying to find some really big cinematic toms. I was just kind of tired of using the ones that I would usually go to. I'm like, I'm just going to do some searching and find some. So I found a few in Splice and then just made a folder called Big Toms. And so I know next time that I'm trying to find a big tom, I can go to that folder and I can keep adding to that database, as I need it. So that's the way that I've come around, doing it.
Okay. What happened when Big Tom walks into the studio later and says, "Dude, why'd you make a folder after me?"
I don't know.
Well, that's cool. So Splice, this might be a dumb question because people who know better are probably like, duh, Splice, but some of us haven't used it. I actually haven't really used Splice yet. So how does it work, and what is that resource? And then what are some other resources? You mentioned That Sound. This is, in my understanding, I've actually been interested in seeing if those guys might like to come to the podcast and everything, because my understanding is they're a company that started in Nashville and just started working with great drummers and going in and doing these sample and loop libraries and just making libraries that you can load right into some of the tools you would use in the studio, like Battery 4 or I think I can load them into Trigger too as well, and
Mhm.
use them for programmed stuff. Any other
Yep.
places that we should know about as far as like cool places to go? Just explore sounds and, like build up your library of stuff that you want to work with.
Yeah, I mean, Splice is great. They've recently kind of become the leader in the sample space, and they're a subscription based service, so you get access to the whole catalog. There's different levels of subscription, which would give you different quantities of options. I think I just have like the base level, and I get as many samples as I need, through it.
Yeah.
There's another one that I found that's similar to Splice. It's called Loop Cloud, and they have a pretty cool way of they have a plugin that you can put in your DAW, and then you can audition the sounds before you download them in your track in real time.
That's great. The
only downside is that if you work in high sample rates, which I'm typically at a minimum of 96K, their samples are usually like 44.1, 48. So there's like this glitchy thing that happens even if you change the sample rate in their preset. So unfortunate part of their technology, but it's super, so you can't hear them in like full fidelity, which I was bummed out. Like once I downloaded it all and bought the subscription, and then I found that while it was convenient, it was also still I still had to kind of still download it and put it in there to see if it was going to work. But the idea of it is awesome, and their sounds are really solid, and being able to audition it live in the session before you decide which ones to download can be a pretty efficient workflow process.
Yeah, big time. I mean, I've experienced that kind of thing in many different ways. I mean, just think about vocal comping. I mean, you have to like hear the vocal in the track in that moment to tell if you like it or not, so definitely true of samples and replacing drums. And man, the hours that I've spent in my time, hand placing a sample on a Pro Tools track and lining things up only to then go back and later and unmute the track to see if you even liked it, It's pretty overwhelming stuff. So very cool that it's automatic like that. And let's see, what else were we going to say about that? I don't remember. Oh yeah, you mentioned 96K. So what was your thinking on that? Why do sessions at 96K? Obviously a challenge for 96K is it can cause our computers to choke up when we're producing stuff, but there must be something about recording at that higher sample rate that appeals to you. What is it?
It's an interesting discussion, and it would obviously, there's a lot of debate around it. One of the reasons that I started making it a practice was because I was working on a project that was initially an independent record. During the process of working on that record, the artist was signed to a major label. And when we got done with the record, I got the deliverable specs from the label, and the minimum was 96K.
Okay.
And then I had to go through this ridiculous process of converting every single session and trying to pretend that it was initially recorded in 96K so I could get it approved,
Yeah.
So that was what maybe prompted me to say, it's maybe worth it. But in the process of after doing that, in experimenting for a long time, I recorded in 88.2 for the idea that like it halves down equally to 44.1 and might be better in like the dithering process, but I just felt like the quality, there was something about the clarity of it that the top end, there's things that are just become clearer, and the bottom end is fuller. There was a event that the Recording Academy put on a few years ago with Andrew Sheps, where they were doing a tour around talking about the importance of high fidelity audio. And they did a very convincing presentation by playing audio that was recorded from 192 and then bringing it down to 44.1 and then bringing it down to MP3. And things were literally disappearing in the mix as they brought down the parts of it. So I just figure in my head, if I'm going to record it at a higher fidelity that's going to capture all of that information, it can't hurt. And the way that computers are designed now, I don't have any problem with plug-in capacity or processing everything runs smoothly. So that could be argued how big of a difference it makes once you get streamed on Spotify. But I figure if I can capture a higher fidelity image in the front end, it's not going to hurt.
Yeah, no, I had an experience once where an artist came in, they brought in a 4-track and he wanted me to help mix it. And so first thing we had to do was transfer everything into the session. And I thought, well, this is kind of a golden opportunity to try transferring it in at 4 different sample rates. And then we just exported each one as the same MP3 end product. And I was really struck how the MP3 that was exported from the higher original sample rate sounded better than the one that was transferred at the lower sample rate. So, that was compelling to me. I did a couple of records at 3296 with some rock bands and an indie band, and I loved the way it turned out. And I was like, oh, that was cool. That was interesting. But then there was also part of me that said, well, maybe you just like that band and that record a lot too.
Right.
And then Joe Ciccarelli was on the show, and I just said point blank, like, okay, what sample rate should we do? And he said 3296, as I recall. Hopefully I don't remember that wrongly. But so that was a reason for me. And then sometimes I run into that, the computer choking, and I think, oh man. So very interesting. So if your computer is handling it okay, is there anything you want to say about the computer that works well for you?
I use in Studio A, we have a Mac Pro, the trash can guy.
Okay.
It's souped up with all the RAM and the faster drive and all that. I'm not huge into that side of the tech stuff.
Okay, that's fair enough.
I just asked for recommendations and made sure that I had enough RAM to be able to handle the amount of processing between the DAW, the virtual instruments that I would use.
Yeah.
And then large track counts for bigger projects,
Well, so
then I always go for the faster drives and the better processors and stuff, and seems to have done well.
Yeah. I'll add to that faster drives, Rockstars means SSD. So if you have a choice between a spinning drive and an SSD, always get an SSD for the system drive and for the audio drive. Spinning drives are fine for backup drives and archiving drives. You don't need a SSD for that. And I think actually a spinning drive mechanically and technically is more reliable for long-term shelf storage than an SSD is. So that's an interesting little thing to be aware of. I remember hearing something along those lines once. So those are a couple of thoughts. The other takeaway too is as you just mentioned, Geos, if you're not, I got to be honest, I'm not totally into that side of it. So I asked for a recommendation. That's one of the best things we can do in the studio. It's just like turn to somebody who we trust, or if we see something working somewhere, that carries huge value and huge weight, where we can just say, I saw that worked over there. I just want that thing. I remember early on, I had an old G3 computer, Mac, and I wanted to get a different, faster computer. I was sick of how slow it was. And somebody else brought in their G4 computer for a session. And I was like, oh shit, this is blazing. This is killer. So then I was just like, done deal. That's my next computer. I'm just buying it, because it's not much fun to get things in the studio where you're not sure if it's really going to solve the problem that you need. And it's fun when you get a chance to see something working, or you've got somebody who just says, this is the thing to get, go get it.
Yeah, definitely.
Helpful. Okay. Let's pivot back to the stuff you really do love talking about. So you've brought in we got a little bit more time here too, so we're good. You've brought in an artist, you've sort of figured out about the drums and how you're going to begin the production. And then what stage do you go to next? I mean, there must be like a really important vocal stage for you too.
Yeah, definitely. Well, after we've gone through the pre-production process of really refining what the vision is, I like to do demo recordings with the artist for a couple purposes. I want to figure out the general tempo. I want to hear the vocalist perform the song with intention and the key that they either wrote it in or that they intend to sing it in. And just kind of want to feel out the flow of it in more of a stripped down manner. So in the case of I don't know, a record where we're cutting songs that were written that we're getting from publishers. There's a full demo on it. The artist may really love it, but I haven't necessarily heard the artist perform it yet. So I want to hear it that way. For working with an artist that has written the songs, I find a fair amount that when artists are doing their work tapes, it might be a long day. Their voice might not have been feeling great that day. They might have felt inspired to just kind of be strumming or playing the piano in a certain key. And that key might not be the best key to support the intention and emotion of the lyric and the melody of the song. So exploring it a half step, a full step, up or down, to find that sweet spot of where does it emotionally feel right and where does the artist's voice feel the richest, I think is a really valuable part of pre-production. And taking the time before we get into the weeds of production and we're trying to capture the moment in the studio, we got the whole band there, and then we're like, man, is this key right? But they haven't really had time to explore it. And maybe that day, we want to drop it down a half step, but it's because the vocalist allergies are bugging them that day. So being able to do that on the front end and then having them sit with that work tape that we worked on before we get into like full production, I think it's a very integral part of my process, and I think it's a really valuable part of capturing that timeless moment that is our intention in recording.
Yeah, that's really smart. And I remember discovering that through my process, because I might have, for a long time, I would find myself in that position of having the studio, being the engineer, asked to produce / engineer it, that vague gray area of, are you really being asked to produce this, or do they just want you to record it? And we welcome any helpful tips kind of thing. And then, or you jump in and you just start recording it and working it out. I'd be so gung ho to get right into the nitty gritty of the song. And then discover at some point, it's like, oh, I didn't even think about maybe we should try exploring the tempo variations. I feel like that's the first place you learn to explore, because I might be thinking about the drums on a production, but remembering to explore the key, it's like, you need to take this song and find out what happens if you move it up a little bit? What happens if you move it down a little bit? And sometimes a really good strategy can be to move it up and find out, where it breaks the singer's voice, where is it too much? It's like you find your boundaries, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And I like to do that until we're like, okay, yeah, that was definitely too high or too low. Let's bring it back and figure out where that sweet spot is that we're really stoked about. But then giving them the reason of doing that in pre-production is then giving them time to sit with it. And I can give them a guitar track or a piano track or a pre-production track of the song, and they can practice with it, and they can go and play a writer's round or a show or something and try it in that key, see if it feels right, and be sure before we dive into the part of capturing the sacred recording of it.
Yeah. And I guess a couple of thoughts about that, rock stars, are if they wrote it on a keyboard, that's a giveaway that this might be a good one for exploration of key, because a lot of, it's not many people that can play the same song in all 12 keys. I'll tell you that, so
right.
They may never have explored it in a different key because they wouldn't even know how to voice the chords and play the same part. So that's a good reason to explore that. Another is, even if they wrote it on a guitar, playing some open chords, sometimes we're a little too lazy to go grab a capo and move it up one half step or two half steps. That to me is something that I find more valuable at the point of, okay, now we're about to capture it, or we're doing the pre-production. Let's find out if there really is the good key for something. And then two really valuable learning lessons for me about key exploration for a song is what you just said, Gio, which is like, maybe there's a note that's too high or a note that's too low. And those will tell you your boundaries of the key, or, it's possible that you can find yourself rewriting the melody to make things fit differently. But typically, you'll find a low note in the verse and you'll find a high note in the chorus. I hate to break it down like that, but that kind of is the nature of pop songs, right? And that high note in the chorus, if the singer hits a sweet spot for that, it can give an urgency to the vocal that can be really compelling, or it could screw it all up because it just makes the voice break and crack and things like that. And then sometimes, we find a place for that, and then we realize, we drop the key slightly so you can hit the high note in the chorus, but now the verse is too low, and you're losing the voice in the verse. So stuff to look at in songs.
Absolutely.
Atom Audio introduces the new A7V monitor for home and pro studios, the next generation of the incredibly popular A7X. The all-new A-series line of monitors delivers the same highly accurate, transparent sound and unique accelerated ribbon tweeter design that has made Atom Audio famous for over a decade, but now includes new innovations such as the rotatable high-frequency propagation system waveguide, allowing the XART tweeter to disperse sound with controlled consistency, and DSP-based room correction and speaker voicings. Using the A-Control software or SonarWorks and Measurement Mic, you can now integrate advanced filters directly to the DSP onboard the speaker to help compensate for imperfect room acoustics without introducing annoying latency or requiring plugins. This allows you to tune your monitors for your room, your mix position, and your ears anytime you want to meet your ever-evolving studio needs. Get the extended 5-year warranty for monitors that will improve as your studio improves at atomaudio.com. Look, it might be hard to describe in a few words what gives records a legendary sound, but it would be pretty easy to describe in a few letters: API. For more than 50 years, API Audio has created large format consoles for world-class studios. Famous for co-founder Saul Walker's circuit designs and original 2520 op amp, the sound of API consoles is the sound of great music. API now brings that legendary sound to your home studio with The Box, a small format console featuring the famous API circuitry that is the perfect analog addition to your digital studio. The Box gives you 8 recording channels on the left with built-in mic pre's, high-pass filters, direct inputs, customizable 500 module slots, and 16 summing channels on the right. Or you can mix using all 24 channels, including aux sends, inserts, and silky smooth faders. API now offers a virtual console experience with a personalized online demo of the Box, 16082, or 2448 console. Sign up for your demo now at apiaudio.com. Any other thoughts about vocal production and just working with the singer in that respect? So they've now lived with the tape and they come in to do the session. By doing that in pre-production, you're not throwing them a big giant curveball once it comes to the tracking session where they get home, having done all this work in the studio, and they think, man, I don't like that key.
Yeah, absolutely. And there's something about vocal days, with artists where it seems like it's just a given that they're either going to be sick or their allergies are going to have driven them crazy. They're going to find out that they were just allergic to
Nashville. They're allergic
fabric
to Nashville.
or something. And it just bound to happen. And there's a lot of a vocal session is a very vulnerable experience, especially if the artist is the songwriter and very connected with the song. And there's this experience that led them to it. And now, as opposed to being on a stage where they have like a band around them and the crowd is kind of there to support, but there's like the separation, they're in their own environment. Now you throw them in a room, either a booth or in my studio, I love recording vocalists in the tracking room. But you put them in a room, you put headphones on them, you put them in front of a mic, and then you say, okay, we're going to record this now, and you have to sing it perfect. And right. And it puts a lot of pressure on capturing that moment. So I like to do as much prep as I can to be able to have the artist comfortable. If I'm working on a long-term record with an artist and I have enough time with them, I love doing mic shootouts when we're in our pre-production process.
Yeah.
So that way we're not doing it like the day of the vocal session, and I can pick the best mic. With mic shootouts, I think it's, my opinion, super important to have, if you don't have a huge mic locker, at least have a brighter mic and a darker, warmer mic. And then try to start expanding your toolkit, as you grow. because there's such a difference that can happen in how a microphone captures a voice. And one of the biggest, I think, strongest lessons that I've learned from another engineer is from Al Schmidt, and his whole philosophy around having the incredible, pristine productions that he had throughout his career is to change the microphone positioning, change the treatment around it, change everything you can before you go and grab an EQ or grab a compressor. To have your hand on the preamp as opposed to your hand on the compressor. And he learned that from the very early days where you didn't necessarily have all of those options, but man, the world of difference it makes to just switch out a mic that doesn't amplify the harsh frequency in a person's voice or amplifies the part that might be missing in their voice, or trying a different preamp that's just going to have a different transient response that's going to fit that song or that key or that vocalist tonality better rather than trying to fix it later. So I'm always for trying to discover what the signal chain is that's best for the artist, and preferably before the final session happens.
Yeah, that's cool. And I like that tip. Al, of course, was a legend at making records, and I'm sad to say that I didn't have a chance to have him come on the podcast. But the first thought I think of is like move the mic before you reach for the EQ. But it's cool to hear you remind us that like make those changes before you reach for the compressor too. So what are some things that make you feel like, is it that kind of change in tonality of the mic pre that might make you feel like you don't need the compressor? I do feel like sometimes just going with a ribbon mic or a darker mic can make us feel that way too, because it no longer, we're not somehow trying to manage aggressive mids and highs or something like that. You have any thoughts?
Yeah,
on,
totally.
Yeah. What about
it depends on the source material in the song. But I know that was a process that was more out of necessity than principle early on. And it was a part of what I read a lot about, like Motown records too, with just your hand on the gain knob because you didn't have a compressor to control the changes in it. Right. But then I had a personal experience with it a number of years ago with an incredible pop artist who just had a ridiculous dynamic range and in a beautiful way, but a very challenging way to record. Because if you wanted to capture, we were doing songs where she was singing the songs linear. So we weren't just like doing a verse and comping that and then doing the chorus. We wanted to capture the moment of singing the song top to bottom. And it starts in a low, rich, mellow delivery, and then it grows into a huge belt, up high. And so the challenge with that is, you have the tone that's working the pre and the way that gets the color that you want out of the mic in the verses, and then they get to the chorus and you're blowing it out and it's all distorted. But then if you pull it back, if you pull the vocalist too far away from the mic, now you have too much ambience and not enough presence with the belt section. Mm-hmm. If you turn the preamp down too much, you lose the saturation and the tonality of it. If it's going to work, throughout the whole thing. So I just used what I had read Al talk about, for years. And I reached over to I was using a API 512 preamp, and I just started learning her dynamic. I had her, as she sang through the song a couple of times, I learned the spots and I started to make markers on where I would adjust to. And I kept my eye kind of on where the not only where the meter was, but where the position was on the pre. And so I knew, okay, at the chorus, I'm going to be at like 12 o'clock. At the verse, I might mean to move it up a little bit. At this bridge, when she blows up, I'm going to pull it back to like 10 o'clock. And so I'm keeping these mental notes and I'm writing the pre as she's performing, and it just captured her tonality in such a strong way. And then once I sent her the rough of it, she sent me an email back and said, "This is the best I've ever heard my voice sound."
That's great.
And she's very accomplished, recording artist. So hearing that, I was like, okay, well, I guess, these legends got something right, and maybe I should take note and try that. That's something that I definitely do when I'm working with a very dynamic artist and we're trying to capture a moment from start to finish. But I wouldn't necessarily say that I'm doing that if I'm working on a project where we're really locked in on, all right, we're going to get the verse knocked out. We're going to do, 10, 15 takes of this, then comp it together, sort of thing. I find the setting that works really well, and it's usually going to sit there. but I always have my ear on that. The combination of the level that you're giving to the pre, the dynamic range of the artist, and then the position that they're in on the mic. And I think when you're talking about vocal production, a really valuable thing to learn outside of those things is being able to hear without looking when the artist is not looking at the mic, when they're looking down at their lyric, when they've backed up 2 inches. It takes some time to start to hear those differences in proximity effect and in the angle at which their voice is coming at the mic. And it depends on the microphone and how drastic that change can be. But a lot of artists aren't trained on that. Most artists aren't. They either have a natural ability for it, or they just sort of learn over the years and they're more acutely aware of their tone. But most artists, even the most accomplished ones, no one's ever really told them that. They got a great voice, put them in front of the mic, and then we'll fix it later. Once I started really focusing on that, I found that I was able to get dramatically more impactful vocal performances, and it also made the editing and mix work much easier because you're capturing it the way that you wanted to hear it. That's probably the biggest impact that the legend that is Al Schmidt, rest in peace, gave me, at least in my career.
That's very cool. And I've heard Tom Dowd talk about that stuff too, because he'd have these big, Bakelite knobs for mic pre's before they had all the compression as well, I guess.
Right. Yeah. And Al learned from.
Yeah. So, did Al study under Tom?
I believe so, or worked with him.
Oh, cool. I didn't know that. I would have known had I got my act together and had a chance to chat with Al when I could. But so I like hearing you talk about the adjustment. Two takeaways from that. One is I'm already thinking about this. I'm like, why didn't I put a mic pre up on the desk? Why is it over on the rack on the side? So that could be a really compelling reason to have your mic pre right within reach at the mix position while you're working and recording with somebody, so that you can do this kind of thing for a vocal anyway. So something to think about, rock stars. And 2 is you described making a change that was sort of for the verse, for the chorus, for the bridge. In your experience, is this an adjustment that's happening mid-phrase and mid-word, or is this more of like just like a bigger, like what you said, where it's like this kind of works for the verse area, this works for the chorus area, this works for the bridge area?
It depends on the vocalist, but that's a really good thing to notice, because sometimes it can just be as much as just changing the gain knob a little bit for each section. In that particular scenario, I was using those reference points, as where to start, but my hand didn't come off the gain knob for the entire performance. I started to learn, because she was very dynamic. So she would come up a notch for the chorus, but then there was a certain line or a certain run she would do where she would get bigger, and then one where she would get breathier. She did a very good job of changing her tonality, like, mid-phrase. So I learned that, and I followed her as I was feeling where she was going with it. And she's very consistent with it too. So, it made it possible.
Right. Without consistency, you'd never have any idea what to do next.
Yeah.
And then do you remember whether she commented that she was hearing that kind of thing in the headphones too? Or is that more something that she would notice, or a singer would notice on playback rather than in the moment?
Well, she mentioned during the session that her headphones sounded great. I remember that. And then it wasn't until after the session where she mentioned just how her voice sounded the best that it ever had. So, but I don't know that she knew what I was doing at all. She just heard her voice in a richer way that was present throughout the track, that the dynamics weren't too, and transients weren't too smashed by compression because of how big and small she would get,
Mm-hmm.
So I think it's more something that she felt than she really could explain technically,
Yeah. Well, I've been talking about this a little bit on the podcast as I record my own voice more in the studio. And I'm realizing over and over again that what we hear in the headphones when we're doing our own voice is not at all what we would hear if we were just listening to the speakers while somebody else is on a mic singing. There's a whole thing about the body and how it's phase canceling against what's coming out of the headphones into your ear and all this stuff. And It just occurred to me that is the reason why every singer goes out there and says like, I need way more in the headphones. Where like you're an engineer and you're like, what the hell, man? The vocals are so crazy loud. I need to stop saying that to the singer because I just realized that the singer, that there's a physical reason why the singer doesn't, you need to have it so loud in your headphones sometimes as a singer that it actually gets up and above your natural sound of your own voice in your head. So just realized something on that. Do you feel like the time you've spent watching YouTube videos, trying out mix tricks, and tweaking version after version of your mixes has not gotten you anywhere? Have you been looking for a simple or straightforward step-by-step process for creating a pro mix that won't take years to learn? What if you could learn that process from a Grammy-winning mix engineer who understood all your mixing struggles and could coach you through them? If you struggle with any of these questions, then the Ultimate Mixing Masterclass is for you. Now you can discover a proven step-by-step mix system from Grammy-winning mixer Craig Alvin for consistently creating a pro-quality mix from your home studio that will sound amazing everywhere. Here's a quote from one of the students. Absolutely the most informative and helpful block of information mentoring on the mix process I've ever been a part of. This was like sitting behind a mix engineer for years, watching and picking up tips along the way, condensed into a 6 to 7 hour session. Look, when you're ready to take your mixes to Grammy-winning quality, then go to ultimatemixingmasterclass.com and go check out Craig's ultimate snare mixing trick now for free. Well, hey, we're getting to the end of the show here, man. There's so much cool stuff for us to talk about. We didn't even get into releasing music and marketing and all that kind of stuff. But let me jump forward to some closing questions. Do you want to just hit the jam session questions real fast on our way out?
Yeah, man, let's do it. I thought they were great.
Okay, great. So when you started out in recording, what do you feel like was holding you back?
The idea that I had to follow the traditional climb the ladder path. And once I recognized that my future was dependent upon the choices that I made and the impact, once I determined that my future was relying upon the way that I spent my time and my intention with things, I had so much more freedom and then eventually opportunity come my way.
Yeah, nice. All right. How about some of the best advice you received, maybe in the studio or maybe just with your business?
Well, we just talked about it. I think the best advice that I received was from Al Schmidt about moving a microphone instead of grabbing an EQ, grabbing a preamp instead of grabbing a compressor, and changing the mic if it's not the right thing for the job. So just learning your tools and adjusting your tools to make sure they're the best thing for the project that you're working on. I'm
going to take that a step forward, and I'm going to offer the Lidge tip, which is move your ass before you move the mouse. We need more of that in the studio for sure,
nice.
Especially us old guys. All right, so how about sharing a recording tip, hack, or secret sauce, something else that the rock stars could use today on their next session?
I think one of the strongest recording techniques or approaches that I learned early on was understanding the importance of microphone placement for a vocalist. We think about it a lot on how we place the kick drum, the snare drum, or overheads, how we put a mic on a guitar amp. But oftentimes the vocalist just gets a mic thrown in front of them and, they do what they do on it. And as we can start to train our ears to be able to hear the difference in the proximity from the microphone, the angle from the microphone, the height of the microphone and where it's positioned, whether it's with the artist's mouth or at their forehead, changes the resonance and how it's being captured. And you can really shape the sound of a vocal performance based on where you position the mic and then how you direct the artist to stay positioned on it. And a really helpful way, like you were talking earlier, is recording yourself. If you record yourself and then listen back to it and then make an adjustment and then do it again, I learned a lot about microphone placement through just recording my own voice and when I didn't necessarily have someone to get in front of a mic every day.
I notice when I'm putting up a vocal mic or even an acoustic guitar mic or something, I hear huge differences moving around in front of that mic, especially if the mic's loud enough in the headphones that I'm going to hear it. Do you find that we're able to trust some of those things that we hear in the moment, or do you find that it's more useful to record it first and then listen back and then make the adjustment?
I think it's a little bit of both. Well, I think that if we're having someone else move around the microphone, we can trust that better. But I think we need to listen back to it to make sure that we're checking ourselves on whether that was how our ears are perceiving it or how the microphone was perceiving it.
Yeah. It's a fascinating thing, man, that whole experience, because even if our ears are telling us wrong in the headphones when we're playing it, our ears are telling us right. They're telling us this is what I want to hear to be able to play this musical part right now. And,
Right.
but we might discover, oh, what we actually want to hear coming out of the speakers is something slightly different. So fascinating stuff. I guess the saga continues. How about sharing a favorite hardware tool for the studio? Something physical that you just like to have on sessions, that you like having around?
I'm fortunate to have a lot of fun tools to play with. I think the most impactful tool that I've added to my toolbox is Burl converters.
I noticed that those were on your gear list. I was going to ask you about them.
Yeah, 1000% worth it. And they just, there's a lot of, similar to sample rate, there's a lot of discussion about, the quality of a converter and how much impact is it going to have on things. And similar to the exercise that Andrew Sheps did that talked me into the sample rate process, Burl did an event at House of Blues a few years ago where they put the Avid 192 Apogee converters and Burl converters right next to each other, equal levels, had a band play live and record it, and with no processing, and everything was zeroed out on the console, and you could switch back and forth between them. And it was very clear that there was a dramatic difference in the warmth, the character of the way that the Burl converters were capturing the sound. I found it initially to have like the biggest impact on like vocal recordings, based on like something that I felt like I couldn't accomplish through another software tool or hardware tool. But once I got in more to running mixes through them, and then I added a Burl summing mixer into my mix chain, it just really solidified the power of putting those transformers on the converters and having a little bit more analog character in the signal path. It just sounded amazing. And similar to something that is a not as commonly maybe mentioned, favorite tool would be the Phantom Focus system, which we both have in our studios.
Oh, I didn't know you had a Phantom Focus. That's great.
I just finally talked myself into doing it this year, and it has made a massive difference. I mean, this room was built well; it sounded good already, but when Carl came in and set the system up, I mean, day one of mixing, I was getting just a better final result because I could trust it. I didn't have to go and listen to it in multiple environments as many times in order to, have a strong reference. And I have been able to get the control and punch and dynamic of the bottom end and mid range in my mixes, and make better decisions during tracking so much quicker, through it. So those are things that aren't as sexy as like a vintage 47 or something, but are things that have really made a dramatic impact on multiple aspects of things. If you're looking at the value of a major investment into equipment, and it can be valuable in multiple ways.
What was the thing you said at the beginning of this? You talked about being a sonic sculptor. Was that it? Was that the term?
Sonic storyteller?
Sonic storyteller. Okay, all right. I was thinking about when I was thinking, mishearing it and thinking about sculptor. That's one of the things that's fun with the Phantom Focus system, or just really great monitoring, is it gives me a confidence to go boldly into carving up sounds and like making some bold changes to stuff. Sometimes I'd make those bold changes and I'm like, dude, that sucks. You're like, it was better before you just messed it all up. It's kind of like the Al Schmidt thing where it's just like, should I start moving the mouse or should I move my ass and get out of the chair and go move a mic? So that for me is very exciting. The more tracking sessions that I get and overdub sessions where I can hear in the Phantom Focus monitors what the mic is capturing, I'm really excited about making some decisions and some changes there. Have you found yourself experiencing a little of that? Have you like gotten too bold about carving things up because of the excitement with the new speakers, and then had to like, backtrack a little, backstep a few times to go back to some of the ways that you might have previously approached a mix or adjusting things?
I haven't had that experience as much as I have just had more confidence in the decisions that I make.
Yeah. Okay,
and I think
cool.
getting to the sound quicker.
Yeah.
By being able to trust what I'm hearing.
Yeah. That's awesome. All right. I do have a question about the Burl stuff because that's exciting to me. Give us very quickly, describe the basics of what the mothership is if that's what you have is a converters going in and converters going out. What is the actual physical construction of that? Do you have to buy a box that houses a bunch of cards and then you put in a bunch of input converter cards and a bunch of output converter cards, or am I thinking about that wrong?
Yes. Yeah, that's correct. So the mothership is a chassis, and that chassis has card inputs, similar to how you'd have like a 500 series thing,
okay,
but much larger. And then you can configure it in whatever configuration works the best for your setup. So you buy the cards individually, and they have different variations of the cards, and they've continued to expand upon those. They've gotten deep into all types of different options for the cards now and how they can be used. In my Studio A, we have 24 in, 32 out, and those cards are 8 inputs or 8 outputs, 8 channels of output per card and 4 channels of input per card.
Oh, so each card, a card is like what would go into, again, if we're using the 500 analogy, if you slid one unit into a 500 thing, in this case, you're sliding one card into the Burl mothership, but that card itself can have 8 outputs on it?
Yes.
Okay. All right. That's helpful, actually. And then if you wanted to have tons of inputs and 2 outputs, then you could just fill it up with that. Was there a particular reason why you decided to have more outputs than inputs?
Because of how I was planning on mixing through, so how I have my mixes set up through buses and effects returns and that sort of thing.
Okay, cool. All right. Well, I'll ask one last techie question. Share a favorite software tool or something you're really excited about that's software based.
Yeah, the BDL Sasquatch plugin is so cool.
Yeah.
It allows you to change the shape of the attack of a transient, mainly for like a kick drum.
Mm-hmm.
And then you can control the resonance and the sustain of it. You could tap your desk and turn it into an 8-second long 808. There's all kinds of cool ways that you can work with bottom end on kick, and I've experimented with it on toms. And then it has a really cool setting where you can set it to you can just choose the note that's the root note of the track, and it will set it to that exact frequency in different octaves, which is just a quicker way than doing the calculation to get to something that would resonate at where like the tonic is.
Very cool. Yeah. Boz Digital. So Boz Millar has been a guest on the show, actually, Rockstars. You can go listen to that episode if you want to hear more about him and designing cool plugins like that. All right, let me take you to our closing question. This one is hypothetical. Gio, we're going to take the Wayback Studio machine. You're going to go back and find young Gio thinking like, I need to find an apartment down in Nashville or wherever you want to find yourself. And you say, listen, man, I've come back in time to give you this one bit of advice. Here's the single most important thing you really need to know to be a rock star of the studio yourself one day. What advice would you go back and give yourself if you could?
Learn how to master patient persistence. I think there's a definite challenge of having big dreams in the recording industry or entertainment industry and staying patient and just trusting that going through the process, it takes time. And that you can get there if you stay focused and you have clear intention about what you hope to achieve. But you can't achieve that just through hoping and just through being patient and waiting. We have to take action every single day to move ourselves one step closer to what we define as success for ourselves, which is why we need to be patient, but also consistently persistent.
Once again, man, we got to get our ass up out of that chair, don't we?
Yeah, man.
Yeah, awesome, man. Well, Gio, thank you so much for joining us on Recording Studio Rockstars. It's been a super pleasure to hang out with you. I got to be honest, man, I had no idea. I really had no idea. And what a treat to discover, you and your turntablism scratching past. I can't wait to have a need for a scratch on a record, and I'm going to give you a call for sure.
Yeah, man, let's do it. Thanks for having me, man. It's so much fun.
Yeah, it's a pleasure, man. Let the rock stars know, please, where they should go. Where would you like them to come find you, learn more about you? And what if they just need to get in touch with you because they're ready to make their next hit record?
The record shop, Nashville.com. You can find all the great technical information and the creative process behind working with the record shop. The most active social media account is on Instagram at the Record Shop Studios. And on any of those accounts, if you're someone that is in the audio industry that's trying to figure out your path, I have made it a mission of mine to offer completely free support and help for someone that has a question, that's looking for some guidance, that is in the position that I was starting out, where they didn't have someone to learn under and gain advice and direction from. If you send me a thoughtful question about something that could be valuable to help you with your career, I will absolutely respond to you and help you however I can. That's the main purpose of why I take part in doing podcasts, is to help tell the story of the great opportunity that I've been able to have in my career. And I'm on a mission to be able to share that knowledge with other people to help them have the same level of fulfillment in their lives that I have in mine.
That's great, man. And I'm inspired by your mission-driven action here. I feel mission-driven here at the podcast, but now after hanging out with you for 2 hours, I feel like I can up my game even more. So well done, man. Rockstars, thank you so much for listening. Gio, thank you for joining us. I look forward to coming to see your studio sometime and having you back over to the Toy Box as well.
Absolutely. Rock on.
All right, man. Look forward to seeing you around the studio. Talk to you soon, man. Cheers.
Take care.
Thanks so much for listening to Recording Studio Rockstars. If you enjoyed the show and want to help make it better, then please share this episode with your friends on social media and leave a rating and review on iTunes to help the podcast reach more rock stars like yourself. You can click directly over to iTunes or go to rsrockstars.com/review for an easy explanation. And remember to hit the subscribe button to keep up with weekly episodes. And if you're ready to make your best record ever now, then head over to Recording Studio Rockstars Academy, where you can start with my free course at mixmasterbundle.com. And if you want more free content from Recording Studio Rockstars, all you have to do is go to rsrockstars.com/email. Again, that's rsrockstars.com/email to enter your name and email, and I'll keep you in the loop with articles, videos, podcast updates, and even free gear giveaways for your studio. Just look for the link in the show notes below. Thanks so much for listening, and thanks for being a rock star. I'm Lid Shaw, and this is Recording Studio Rockstars. Now, go make great music. Recording Studio Rockstars would like to give a big thank you to our amazing sponsors who help make this episode possible: API, OWC, Spectra 1964, Samply, Atom Audio, and Isotope. Remember to use these coupon codes for special discounts. At isotope.com/rockstars, use the coupon code ROCK10 for 10% off any plugin purchase, or start your extended 30-day free trial subscription for access to many plugins. At samply.app, sign up for a free account with unlimited projects and use the coupon code RSR20 to get 20% off the first 3 months when you're ready to upgrade to a pro account. At recordingstudiorockstars.com/account, Academy, use the coupon ROCKSTAR for 10% off any course for a limited time. You will find links to all these awesome sponsors in our show notes. These are all things I highly recommend for your studio. They're going to help you make your best record ever. I would also like to thank our fantastic team here at Recording Studio Rockstars, Vlad Weselchenko, Braden Stremming, and John Richardson for additional podcast and video production. Thanks so much for listening, and we'll see you in the next episode. Cheers.